So we're in the seventh chapter. We've skipped forward a little bit to the seventh chapter of Bava Kama. And we're with this guy who steals a sheep or cattle, and he slaughters it and sells it. And for reasons we don't understand, maybe because this is a brazen act, maybe because selling or slaughtering the animal means that you can't give it back. So you can't make restitution. And actually, you destroyed the evidence as well. Maybe you've eaten the animal or it belongs to somebody else. But maybe that's why. But for whatever reason, the Torah prescribes an unusual punishment. He has to pay back 4 or 5 times what he's stolen. Whereas generally, if there's negligence on the part of a custodian or theft, they only pay back double. So the question, but anyway, so we have this 4 or 5 times penalty, and the question is going to arise, well, okay, when exactly is it payable? And in the third Mishnah of the seventh chapter, we learn Ganav al pi shnayim vetavach umachar al pihem nimtzeu zomamim mishalmim lo et hakol. So he stole on the evidence of 2 witnesses. That seems like that's going to be okay so far, because generally, in order to levy money, in order to force someone to pay out money in a civil action, one would require 2 witnesses. So he stole on the evidence of 2. He killed or he sold on their evidence. So we're good. He has to pay 4 or 5 times. Nimtzeu zomamim. They're found to be false. Zomamim, false witness. Well, I mean, it's always translated as false witnesses. Maybe we should have translated it as scheming witnesses. It's the verses are found in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. Ki yakumed chamas beish. Some criminal, aid Hamas, is not just an unrighteous witness. It's a criminal witness. It's a malignant witness. If some malignant witness arises and brings perverted justice, I mean, he bears false evidence, then the judges have to investigate. But if they find he has testified falsely, then you shall do unto him as he schemed. The word zamam comes up again. As he schemed, as he plotted to do to his brother. So the false witness gets the same punishment that he schemed to do to the other person. In order to demonstrate the witness is false, by the way, we don't use the kind of logical methods we would use in courts today, because the only evidence in a Jewish court in the time of the Mishnah is the evidence of a witness. So, for example, 2 other witnesses would have to show up, and they'd have to say, oh yeah, this witness cannot have witnessed the crime because we knew he was drinking with us in a pub at the time. Or this witness cannot have witnessed the crime because he was in Caesarea with us at the time. In other words, to demonstrate that a witness is false, we need to bring another pair of witnesses who can prove that the testimony must be untrue. And the witness is called, the word used in Torah is zaman, to scheme, and the witnesses are called edim zomamim, scheming witnesses. We, of course, need, they're plural, because, of course, we need 2 witnesses in order to do anything for any practical purposes. So let's go back to our text. Nimtzeu zomamim. They're found to be false. They're found to be scheming. Mishalmim lo es hakol. They pay him the whole penalty. In other words, they have to pay out the 4 or 5 times, because that is what they conspired to make him pay. They have to pay the 4 or 5 times. Ganav al pi shnayim v'tavach u'machar al pi shnayim acherim. Maybe he stole on the evidence of two, and then he killed or sold on the evidence of two others. So far we're okay. We got two witnesses for each step in the process. They're both scheming. We got four scheming witnesses here. Rishonim mishalmim tashlumei chefel ve'achronim mishalmim tashlumei shlosha. The first ones pay twice. Why have the first ones paid twice? Well, the penalty for twice, the penalty for straight theft is twice. So their evidence essentially is evidence that he is straight theft. So they pay twice. The last pay three times. Well, the second pair of witnesses were the ones who would have obligated him in paying fourfold or fivefold compensation. So let's take it as fivefold in the worst case. They have to pay out three times. So the first pair of witnesses pays out twice, and the second pair pays out three times. If the second set of witnesses were false, if the second were found to be false witnesses, so the first witnesses have stood up okay, he's still guilty of theft. So he pays twice. He pays double compensation for the theft. They pay three times because they falsely accused him of selling or slaughtering. Echad mina achronim zomem. What if one of the second set of witnesses was false? Batla edut shniya. So if one of the second witnesses is false, the evidence of the second is just completely void. But we haven't yet proved that they're both false witnesses, so we don't have a penalty. Echad mina rishonim zomem. If one of the first witnesses was false, just one, echad mina rishonim zomem, batla kol ha'edut. If one of the first set of witnesses is false, the whole thing falls down. She'im ein geneva ein tvicha ve'ein mechira. Because if there's no theft, then there's no slaughter or sale. There's no point in witnessing that this guy slaughtered or sold the thing that he stole if we can't bring evidence that he stole it in the first place. So the whole thing falls over. The whole thing falls over. What if he let's just play around with some more of these mind games. Ganav al pi shnayim v'tavach u'machar al pi ed echad. He stole on the evidence of two, so we're okay so far. He's liable to double penalty. V'tavach u'machar al pi ed echad, but he killed or sold on the evidence of one. This is a bit like a situation where one of the final pair of witnesses is found to be false. So we're going to expect there to be no further penalty. He pays out double for stealing, but we cannot demonstrate that he sold or slaughtered. But let's keep going. Or al pi atzmo, maybe on his own evidence. Maybe he admits that he slaughtered or sold. He doesn't make fourfold or fivefold restitution. He doesn't have to do this. And this is really interesting because usually in a civil claim between two people, if the plaintiff and the plaintiff, if the defendant accepts the claim, usually the plaintiff would win. In a normal civil action, if the defendant admits the claim, the plaintiff wins. But here, seemingly, no, we can't be committed, we can't be found guilty of slaughter and sale in the event of a theft by our own evidence. Bit like the maybe it's the Fifth Amendment. You can't be testified on your own. You can't be convicted on your own testimony. Ganav v'tavach b'Shabbat. He stole and he slaughtered on Shabbat. Now we're going to reprise some Mishnayot, which we learnt which we learnt earlier in the chapter. Ganav v'tavach b'Shabbat. He stole and slaughtered on Shabbat. Well, he's broken Shabbat, so we expect him not to be liable. Ganav v'tavach muchar la'avodah zarah. He stole and he slaughtered and he sold for idolatry. Again, we expect him not to be liable for civil damages because he's guilty of idolatry. Ganav mishel aviv met aviv tavahu machar. He stole something that belonged to his father, but his father died, so he inherited the animal. And then he slaughtered and sold it. Again, it's his animal. We don't expect him to be liable. Ganav v'hikdish, he stole it and he dedicated it to the temple. So it's not his anymore. And afterwards, he slaughtered and sold. In all of these cases, in all of these cases, he pays twice, but he doesn't pay 4 or 5 times. He doesn't pay 4 or 5 times. And that is not the verdict of the Mishnah at the beginning of the chapter. So it's very puzzling. Rabbi Shimon says, there are certain holy things for which he's responsible. So, for example, if you dedicate an animal for teruma, and then while you're bringing it to the priest, you lose it, you have to bring another one. There are certain kinds of sacrifices for which you're responsible. And Rabbi Shimon is saying, for these sacrifices, he actually pays 4 or 5 times because he's still responsible for their monetary value, even if they don't actually belong to him. And for other ones, if he's not responsible, it's just temple property, so he can slaughter it and sell it, and okay, he's in breach of that obligation, but he's not liable to 4 or 5 time restitution. In those situations, he is exempt.